All right, well, what is up? Welcome to the Free Will Photos live stream. Um, Ran into some computer technical issues, so things are going to be just a little bit different today than what I had planned for them to be. Specifically because my computer, like you see right now, it just decided to jump over, skipping through the timer. I don't know what's going on with my computer. Maybe I just don't know how to use a computer. Whatever. We're gonna have a good time here on the live stream. Over in the chat section, drop any questions throughout the live stream uh, that you may have, and I'm just gonna go through some of these photos that viewers have submitted. So I'll show you what the agenda was supposed to be. Let's go ahead and jump over to that scene real quick. So we were supposed to go over tethering inside of On1, and I was going to show a way of using a watch folder, or really just a folder that you'll be able to access inside of On1 if you didn't have a Nikon or a Canon camera. But again, I was running into issues with my computer. Let me go ahead and cut that off. Sorry if that was my computer's just doing whatever it wants to do right now. Anyhow, what I was going to do is show how to set up a folder using your tethering software. You save all of your images into a folder, and then from that folder, you're able to watch them show up inside of On1, and then you can make those edits. It's one of the beautiful things about using On1. You don't have to import like you do with Lightroom, but we're just going to go ahead and give that a check because we're not going to be able to do that today. And the very next thing is we're just going to jump into the edit user submissions. Now, I did a few edits already, but what we're going to do, and come back over here. What we're going to do today is I'm going to actually walk you through step by step with the edits since I'm not doing the tethering. And, that way we have some time with the live stream and things of that sort. So before I get started, if there is anything that you want to know up front, you can go ahead and start dropping that into the comment section or the chat box. And if not, that's perfectly fine. But let's go ahead and get this thing going. So come over here, and here is the album that I put all of the photos. So shout out to everyone who was kind enough to share their images. Again, I want to make it very clear, outside of using them inside of On1 Photo Raw for this live stream or just for tutorial purposes only, I will not use your image to sell or make any profit off of or anything like that, right? It's just for educational purposes. So I'm not going to infringe on your copyrights or your creative intelligence when it came to making these images. I respect that from a photographer to fellow photographers. Now, what we have here, we'll take a quick look. We have a submarine looking device here, and then this is on a ship, and there's a interesting, just based off of the metadata that I got, this is a raw photo. It's an NEF file, which is the Nikon version of a raw photo. And then of course this is a version because I wanted to show two different things with this particular image. The next image here, I don't think I did any edits to because I was going to edit this one live just to show some very basic work on editing this particular image. We have, and I guess I should give the shout out. So this one came from A. Mitchell. These two, because again, this is a version. These two came from A. Mitchell. And then if we come down here, we have a JPEG from Andre Brouchard, Branchard. I think that's how you say that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Throw it in the live chat. I guess I don't know how you would be able to correct me, but I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. But you can see kind of the final edit here. There's some more work to be done with this image. But I didn't want to make the stream go for too long. I wanted to get through these images. And maybe we'll revisit for the next live stream, assuming my computer works out and all that good stuff. Then the next thing that we have here is this car. And this one is from Andrea Beeson. And I hope that I'm saying that right. This is a raw file from an Olympus camera. I have never worked on a Olympus file, so that was interesting just to see the base imagery. And, you know, I only had the one to work with. But with that being said, I'm going to have to see if I can find some more Olympus raw files. So if you have more, Andrea, and you want to see some different edits, I find Olympus, they have a the contrast that is built into their algorithm is like right in between Canon and Nikon. Now I could be wrong with that, but that's what I'm experiencing at least. And then you also got to take into account that on one, the way that it renders a raw file from all of these different manufacturers or companies or whatever, it's going to render it differently than you would see inside of Capture One or inside of Lightroom or Luminar or some of these other photo editing applications that can deal with raw files. And then we have another image here. I haven't fully decided what I was going to do with this one yet because it looks great as is. I believe that this image is a final product. And Andy, if you are watching, please shout it out if this was the final image that you came up with and you just want to see what I would do with it. I mean, it looks like it was cropped or it was already framed very well at the time that it was being shot. So I really have, I really don't have much to do on this one. But, you know, we'll see what we can put together. The next image here, this one is also from Andy Miller. I was actually playing around with this one, and I think this is really cool. All right. And then, of course, another image from Andy Miller. You can kind of see the final result. This is probably the one that I spent the most time on because I developed this as a composite, and I wanted to show how I use layers and blend modes. And, you know, that's really all that's in there on top of the filters. So you'll be able to see that you can do a lot of things that you would normally have to go into Photoshop for. I think that Photoshop, and, you know, I do have to kind of make an announcement. I recently unsubscribed to the Adobe Creative Cloud, and I strictly use On1 Photo Raw really for 90% of my work. I found that 90% of what I do with photography, On1 delivers very, very well. So there's no need for me to have Lightroom. And I purchased Affinity Photo, and I also have GIMP. So I'm going in between Affinity Photo and GIMP, but I really have not had to export an image to do more in-depth work. As you can see in this photo right here, it's 100% inside of On1 Photo Raw, so we'll look at that. And then I just played with the exposure and a few color sliders inside of this one, as well as throwing a HDR look. And then we have another image from A. Mitchell. And this image is a on-photo file. I guess I did something to it. I don't remember what I did there, so we'll take a look at all of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this particular image. I'm going to make it full screen because I don't know if you can tell, and this does have edits on it already. So I'll open up the edit module just so that way, you know, it'll be a little bit more fluid moving through the image and working on the image and things of that sort. So let's just get this opened up here. All right, so before we take a look at anything down here in the tone, and I'll just close that so it's not a distraction. Let's take a look at the info here. This was shot on a Nikon 1, and it's a 10 megapixel camera for anyone who's not familiar with it. I know that I wasn't at the time that I received the file, so I went and did a little bit of research. And on this particular image, the settings were 3200 ISO, 3200th of a second for the shutter speed, and then it was also shot at f8. Now, with no exposure compensation. And, you know, I don't know if I can see it in here, so maybe we will have to go back into browse. This particular image was shot on exposure priority mode, or aperture priority, not exposure priority. Wow, can't speak today, or any other day for that matter. But if you look right here, just making sure that my webcam isn't covering this. If you look right here, the aperture priority mode is what was used, and we see that he was using a 10 to 30 millimeter lens. If I'm not mistaken, this is an APS-C sensor camera. It's a 1-inch sensor. So essentially you get a 1.5 times crop, which means that this turns into a 15 to roughly 45 millimeter, or I guess exactly 15 to 45, which works out fine, I'm sure. And in all reality, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting the image that you're looking for. So I'm going to say that this is the image that A. Mitchell was looking for. And when I first got the photo, I said, okay, I got to figure out what the subject is, because there's so much going on in here. And so I was like, okay, well, let me see what were the settings, because was he trying to expose for this, or was he trying to expose for what was out here? And, you know, that's a big deal, right? We want to nail our exposure for the subject. Everything else should be complementary to the story that we want to tell. That's the very first step in, you know, just deciding a composition before we hit the shutter button. We say, okay, this is the subject. What do I need to help tell the story for the subject? You know, and if you are curious, if I'm not mistaken, this is potentially Big Ben. I could be like absolutely wrong, and for the sake of not looking or, you know, not being uncultured or uneducated, I'm just gonna say this is the subject is a clock tower here. All right, and over here are buildings that are kind of leading lines essentially into it. So I could see why the buildings were added here. And then there's this red submarine looking thing that's also kind of like a leading line. And then we have this frame that's going around the subject here. So because he was in aperture priority mode, it wanted to expose some of this stuff over here, because it realized like, hey, this is really dark and this is really bright. So in order to expose for this, it had to bump the ISO up, but it also brought the shutter speed down because it was at f8. What I would recommend doing in a situation like this, because the camera doesn't really know, right? The camera knows whatever the settings are that you put onto the camera, essentially. I would have shot this in maybe 2 or 3 different exposures. And that's specifically one underexposed. So this would be completely dark, but this would be exposed properly. And then this would be, and then the second one would be the exposure for this being completely, or exposed properly, and this being blown out. And then on one, we can photo stack those using an HDR merge and really blend those two together, or we could use a luminosity blend mode and bring those two images together. So there's a few different options. The reason why I bring that up is the way that we shoot our photos really does drive the way that we edit the photo in post-production. So if you know that you're going to do some editing in post-production, you should be aware of what decisions you're making while you are out taking the photo. Now, if you come back and you're like, hey, you know what? I got what I got and I can't go back because I'm never going back to that location. So you want to make the most of the photo. Now that you kind of understand where I was going with this very long explanation, now we can take a look at what I was doing in the tone and color and why I added certain effects that I did. So the very first thing here, and let's go ahead and turn off the preview. And better yet, I think this would do good. There we go. All right. So as you can see, on the left is the original, and on the right is the edit that I put into the image. And I'll go ahead and go straight to just the screen recording. No need for me to be in there. So on the right is the edit, on the left is the screen record, or I'm sorry, the original. Over here you can see that I brought the exposure down a little bit, and don't worry about the numbers so much. Pay attention to what happens to the photo when I get the basic tone. Whenever I approach an edit on a photo, I always start with the tone and color, and that's really just, or I'm sorry, the tone, not even really the color, because I deal with color very specific, and I want to focus on getting my exposure the way that I want. And I don't look at the exposure slider as what makes my exposure, right? What I really want to pay attention to is what dynamic range do I have in my tones across the image. The best way to do that is to click on levels and to look at your histogram. This, in a nutshell, is very simple, right? On the far left, you have your blacks, and then just a little bit over, you have your shadows, all the way up until at some point you get into your midtones, and then you get into your highlights, and then you get into your pure whites. Now, sometimes I turn on the clipping, the exposure clipping, or the levels clipping. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends on how I feel like editing that day. But now that you understand where all of these values are, the histogram becomes a little bit easier to read, because you'll look at it and you'll say, okay, in the original, I don't know if the histogram will update whenever I go to the original with the preview off. Don't think it does. And even if it did, my computer moves really slow, so I'm not going to subject you to that painful situation. So here we have the histogram, and I want to make sure that I have values represented in the far left, and that's my blacks, and in the far right, which is my whites, and then everything kind of spread out as evenly as I can, unless you're going for a creative approach and you're trying to specifically get a shadow to mid-tone rich photo. That could absolutely be, that's an editing style. That could be a choice that you make. However, that's not what I was going for. So essentially, I had made the adjustments, which was bringing down highlights, the exposure here, and what I want to do is recover this sky, because in the original, the sky was just blown out. It was super bright. And I recovered the sky by bringing down the highlights. And when I bring them down now, I don't think it's going to do too much more, because at some point you start to hurt everything else around the image. So I'm just going to put that back up a little bit and leave that be. And essentially, that was it in the tone department. Now, over here on the effects tab, I have some other things that I went ahead and did. Before I show you these, I'm going to show you a way of drawing attention to what I believe is a subject, which is the clock. The reason why I believe it's the clock is because if I turn on show focus mask, you're going to see that the focus is mostly in this area, like right in here. And it was shot at f8, so it makes sense that by the time you get to this point that these things are in focus. But there isn't much in focus over here, so there wasn't any intention to focus here and throw this out of focus, which leads me to believe, because this is a frame and there's leading lines, the focus is right there. So we're going to edit this photo as if this clock tower building is a focus, right? Or was the subject. One of the ways that you can absolutely draw attention to a subject is by cropping in. Now, here's the challenge with a 10 megapixel file. As soon as you start to crop in, you lose resolution pretty fast. And, for anyone out there that is not a fan of cropping in, I get it. But I'm going to show it for the sake of this live stream tutorial. And, you kind of get an idea. Now, the focus becomes a little bit more like this. I think because this is in such a tight area of the frame, instead of freeform, I'm going to go 1:1. I'm just going to bring it down and make my crop something like this. All right. And you can do it a few different ways. If you think the submarine is a point of interest and you kind of want that in the foreground to provide some depth, I don't know if they have as much context together. The content just doesn't seem to match. To have a clock tower and a submarine, those don't go together. But let's pretend that they do. Maybe this is the better solution for the crop. You hit apply, and that's what we get. Now, you lose a lot of information when you do that, especially with a 10 megapixel camera. So my recommendation, make sure that whatever you do, you always go back to, or when you're taking the photos, you're making decisions on what you want to do with it in the end. So I'm not going to crop it down. I just wanted to show that for reference. What I am going to do is, I notice that there's a lot of noise in this picture. And that's because we're using a small sensor. It's a 1-inch sensor, and it is also up at 3200 ISO. So the very first thing that I do, if I have a very noisy photo, I get rid of the noise. And that's what you're going to see here if it worked out. And I'm not a huge... I don't have a problem with noise in a photo because I think that noise can bring some texture and some really nice dimension to an image at times. But for this one, it just seemed like the camera was tapping out on its ability to deliver a good file, because in order for me to kind of get this cleaned up, I don't know how. Let me turn on the preview again. Maybe that will help determine. So it's easier to see up here in the ship the noise that's over here to how much it's been reduced, but it's still pretty noisy. And I'll zoom in a little bit more so that way it might be a little bit easier to see. But there's a lot of different challenges with this particular image, and this is not me digging on the photographer. I'm just saying, when you run into these these issues, how do you correct for it? So the very next thing that I did is I bumped in all of that stuff, and I said, okay, I need to figure out what my tones are in the image, because I want to make sure that hit fit. There we go. So I went ahead and did some tone enhancing with a little bit of and I edited the mask in a way that darkened some areas and left other areas kind of bright. You can see we start to get a little bit more detail back in the sky, and it transforms the image into something, that has a little bit more drama to it. But now we start to, and then I went ahead and threw in a sunshine filter. So the sunshine filter just gives a little bit more color and vibrancy to the overall image. And I felt like, it needed it. It could have absolutely stayed just like this without the sunshine. But when you add in the sunshine, it just brings in more contrast over here and really livens up this area as well. But what the sunshine filter also does, because of the warmth, it's adding in extra orange into this red. So what I need to do is control this red. So all I did was put on a color adjustment, and I went to the red tab and I just brought down the saturation. Nothing complicated here. Very, very, very simple, right? So now we have a much more controlled image. And then the last thing that I did, because again, I believe that the point of focus is this clock and this building over here, I went ahead and threw a vignette on, and that just darkens everything else around here. Now it makes this really blue and makes this really blue. I find that that's okay. I would be satisfied with that. Because I would focus in more here, and a sky is supposed to be blue, and if this is directly over it, that's a reflection. So that kind of makes sense. So I wouldn't have an issue with this final image. So we went from here to here, and this was the final image that I came up with. Let me open up our film strip. We'll come back to this one, and let's go to this photo. Now, it's still loading. I'm gonna get some coffee while it loads. All right. So now that it's done loading, we'll go back to full screen with the image, and I'll show you the before. It is a very blue image, and this image, there's only really two colors, right? Brown, and then there's the blue that I believe this is all snow. It makes sense for it to be snow. So we associate snow as being white. So there's a little bit of a color shift with this one. So we're going to focus on correcting that color shift. Let me go back to the develop module. And it's also just a tad bit underexposed. I don't know if it looks underexposed because of the blue, but that was one of the things. So essentially what I had to do here is I developed some contrast. I started with the black and white sliders first, and you can see, this is primarily dealing in the highlights section of the image. All right. And that's just because, look at it. There's tons and tons of white here. Now this is all pretty grainy and pixelated as well. I don't remember. So this was shot on a point and shoot, a Canon PowerShot. So those present their own challenges. I'm not going to get into that. The settings: 500 ISO, 1/80th of a second, at 5.6. This is not a bad shot, right? This is not a bad shot at all. There is a purpose and a way that we can use this particular shot. So I dealt with the exposure. I brought the blacks down first, and then I brought the whites up, and you can see that it really separated the tree from the background, and that's what I was really going for here. I did some cleanup work. If you come over to the retouch, you can see added a few nodes and did some retouch there. But that was just because I felt that there were some distractions around here, and I just wanted to get rid of some of those distractions. Where I think we develop a good sense of how this photo can be used is in the effects tab. And that's with this black and white filter. And I'll turn it off, and you see there's still like this blue color cast. And we're even peaking over here in our whites a little bit. Or there was something red there. Nonetheless, you turn on this particular, the black and white filter, and it really brings this image to life. Now, there was not enough focus to capture like the sharpness of this image. So the very first thing I want to do is come to tone, and let's see if we can do something with the detail. I moved it up to 10 before, and as you can see, the more detail you try to add, the more grainy it gets, and then if you bring it down, it just gets even worse. So I think we'll stay around 10 or 14. And then we will, and you see I brought the contrast up. If I didn't have the contrast, it would be pretty dull, and the tree would not have popped off of the white or the background as well. Because there's only blue in the shot, so all I could do is move the blue fader or blue slider and the aqua slider, but I didn't feel like those were doing anything for the overall image, so I left that alone. Now, where you start to develop this image, I believe, happens in split toning. Split toning is probably going to be the best, and I would probably go something that is like we know that this is snow, so maybe like that, but let's flip the colors and maybe make it less of each of those and balance into the highlights a little bit more. So you gotta kind of play with this. This shot, this is actually probably the best split tone option, and there's a lot of different ways that you could split tone. I've showed some unique ways of doing it in a previous video that unfortunately did not work out so well. But this is about as much as you're going to do with an image like this. Outside of building it into a composite where you add more elements as layers inside of here, I did not do that because I just don't have anything that I can add on top of this in a way that would build this particular image up. All right, so we'll leave that one like so, and we will go to this car. Now, this is a really, really cool photo. When I seen it, I said, you know what? I know exactly what I want to do. I'll show you the original. Let me do that, and I'll show you the original. There it is. It's orange, and this again was shot on an Olympus. I have not edited on an Olympus before, so it was nice. The very, very even tones across the image, even inside of the car, and there's like character in the car. You can see that it's a little bit darker orange here, lighter orange there. There's some paint imperfections going on here. There's another paint imperfection here. There's just all kinds of stuff going on with this car, and I thought that was really cool. So what I wanted to do was instantly I said, you know what, On-One 21 or On-One Photo Raw 2021, has this ability to swap colors. So that's essentially what I was like, okay, I'll do that. But then I said, you know what, that's a little gimmicky. I'm not going to leave it at that. I do want to do that. But as you can see, I transformed it a little bit more into a it's very bright around the vehicle. I want to focus on the subject of the image, which is the vehicle. So I darkened everything else around it using masks. And I'll show you those right here. And this is just the base adjustments. Like I said, the tones were so even. I didn't have to make too much off of center from on one as the photo came in. And I really appreciate that about the Olympus camera. And there it is. I was just trying to figure out where the adjustment was coming from for this light adjustment, because if I turn this off, you see that the entire image gets bright. I turn this one on and we get this. And this is what I considered to be the base of the image. And as you can see, it's just an exposure all the way around the vehicle. And the way that I made that was I made a color range selection on the car, and then I worked it out to get rid of some other stuff around the vehicle, and then I painted in the tires so that way the tires didn't get the exposure removal, so to speak, or lower the exposure. I can't talk right now. Around the entire vehicle, so you can see I have pretty much just the vehicle selected. Now there are some areas on the vehicle, again, where those imperfections were, that I did not even try to fix, and I'm just going to allow the exposure to be lowered on that, because what I found it does is it ties the vehicle into the background. Because if the vehicle was just one color and the background was another color, it wouldn't be a believable edit, right? You could look at this and you can say, oh yeah, that's really contrasty. And I believe that the light could have looked just like that, right? Like there's a softbox coming in from the top right here and just shining down on the vehicle, maybe even a grid just to keep the light really harsh here, and then there's fall off of the light across the rest of the vehicle. That's possible, right? I'm not going to harp on that. I'll show you the rest of the adjustments. This adjustment is just to brighten up the tires a little bit to bring those out. Nothing fancy there. And then this adjustment is a vignette around the entire image. Now I'm going to turn the vignette off because for the next series of edits that I added into the image, I think it's beneficial that we kind of talk about. So the first one, this is just a creative style. If you ever want to get a desaturated look, and this is already a little desaturated, what you want to do is grab a black and white filter, and I used a template here. I have a template called Accurate Black and White Conversion. Sorry about that. The Accurate Black and White Conversion is a numerical value for each one of the channels in order to... It's what TV uses back in the day when they were trying to accurately convert or represent colors in a grayscale environment. This is what they used, these numbers. Now, the only reason why, and I can't even remember what the numbers are exactly, because there's a mathematical equation for at least two of them where you add or you subtract the difference between whatever. Not important. What is important is I wanted a more desaturated look on the vehicle. So I went ahead and copied the mask from the local tab, and I dropped that in here. And then I went through and really just figured out what opacity works. Now, this very well could have been 50%. It's not like it's going to look that much more different at 50% than 49. I guess I just drug it to 49. So no reason for that. But at 50%, this really does look the way that I anticipated would look. And I appreciate it the way that it looks this way. Now, that is one way. I'll go ahead and turn off the black and white because that's like the desaturated look, right? And this is already a little bit of a desaturated vehicle. So maybe I want to enhance the color on the vehicle, and we'll let my computer catch up. So this is me enhancing that orange color, right? I went into the orange color range and I moved the hue of this through the gamut, and I eventually settled on red because, you know, this, it just looked really dark. And then this was looking good, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just go all the way. And that was like, oh yeah, look at that, it's a color pop. And now we have this desaturated look that is a color pop, and I could very easily go and desaturate the entire background of the vehicle to only leave the car in full color. All right. So that was the color enhancer. And then, of course, you know, if the software has the tool, why not use it? So we have here now the color replace, or replace color. That is a filter that was available and or is available in ON1 Photo Raw 2021. And as you can see, using the same mask that I've been using, I can run through a series of colors here and get really wild. Now, the difference between using the replace color and color enhancer is this particular filter, you can only select one channel to manipulate the hue, saturation, and brightness, and then you have to go to another channel to manipulate the hue, saturation, and brightness. You can end up with some very inconsistent tones or just color response in general. So I recommend the color enhancer be focused on enhancing one specific color, not changing the hue of an entire color, right? The color enhancer works really well in a spectrum of colors or a range of colors, but this, I can literally choose any color. If I were to come over here and click the box, I get this little pop-up here, and as I drag this around, I can get as light all the way until, you know, if I want to make this car white, I can put white on there. Now, because there is not as much, I can't make, or I could make it pure white. Let me see, how would I do that? Is it saturation? Nope. Bring that all the way down. Maybe I'm not using pure white, but this is also blending with the vehicle underlying color. So it's not like a throw this over that color, right? Which is why you're probably better off going with a more saturated value of the color, or a saturated value, than a desaturated value. Probably should be able to make this white, but I would argue that if you want to do something like that, you're better off going into Photoshop or Affinity Photo, where you can really work on this in a layer styled format, and get what you want out of it. Now I'm going to turn off the replace color. This one here is just dynamic contrast for what may or may not be condensation on the window. It's a little hard to tell. I think it is. I just wanted that little detail to pop a little bit more. I think it is condensation. And maybe this is water on the door now that I actually think about it. And that would make sense for the hood of the vehicle to be shiny and this over here. So yeah, looks like it was water. I don't know why I'm just now realizing that, but definitely water. All right. The next thing, so I'm going to go with the color enhancer, put that on there. And the last thing that I thought this needed was a border. Now, I don't know why I thought it needed a border. And I will have you know that I did crop the image. And I cropped this image because I just didn't feel like everything else up here needed to be in the image. Again, the subject is the car. I want people, when they look at an image, and you know, I hope that most people have this same focus. When a person looks at the image, what is the subject, and is it clear to that individual what the subject is? Obviously, even if I were to leave this full resolution, you would be able to look at this and say, oh, the car is the subject. Makes perfect sense. But because I was a little skeptical, I just wanted to see what I could do and see how this all worked out. So that's what I did. All right, let me go ahead and go back to here. And then I just threw a border on there, right? You seen that I cropped it, and then I threw a border on here. And I just thought that added a little bit of flair to the photo. And I didn't, this is really, literally, I clicked add filter. Uh-oh. Did not mean to do that. That's pretty trippy. That might be appropriate at some point. But I just hit add filter and then borders. And the very first one is white border, white square under simple. And that's that. Could you change this? Absolutely. I don't know if I would personally care to change it. A black square, it gets lost, right? To me, it gets lost. A white square really does help complement with the I'm supposed to go to simple and then white square. There. This just looks more aesthetically pleasing to me. So there you have it. All right. I'm going to hit done on that. Let it take me back to the grid view. Guess it didn't want to take me to the grid view. All right, we'll come back to this photo. This photo I'll show real quick because this one, I literally seen it and I said, okay, I wonder what AI Auto will do to this image. As you can see, it's a little underexposed, but I don't believe that the image feels underexposed. I like a darker image, and when we talk about an owl, it's a nocturnal animal. This seems to make pretty good sense to having an owl in a darker environment. Truly, that doesn't bother me. Now, if you hit AI Auto, it wants to do exactly what I would normally do if I had seen the histogram in that manner. I want to spread out the dynamic range and get, you know, some good tonal value or tonal range in the image. Did that open up this owl so you can see it a little bit better? Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you see that there's some noise in here? Yes, but it's not a problem to me. Personally, I would not have an issue with noise on a photo like this because it just seems like it really does fit in, right? The environment, you can see all the leaves around, and this is a masterfully crafted shot. You can tell, one, who the subject is, and two, hopefully there aren't too many distractions, but there's no distraction in this image that is unwarranted. All right. The leaves, they paint the picture of the environment that the owl is in, which is what we would see. And if we were to walk in the woods and you were to look over to the left, like it feels like you were in this moment. The leaves help bring you into the immersive experience of the photograph. So I truly appreciate the composition of this image, which is why I probably would not have messed with the AI auto in this particular image. Hey, what's going on, John? No worries. Welcome to the stream. It's a wonderful day, and I'm glad that you're here and you were able to make it in from the UK. Okay. Yeah. So it should, or the live streams, the way that I understand them, and you have to forgive me. I did some research. I promise I did. Yes, they should absolutely be available on the page, on the YouTube channel later on. And truthfully, I was just going over the edits that I made. But yeah, anyone who is wondering if the live stream is going to be available on the channel as a typical upload, yes, it should be. And if it isn't, I apologize. Next time I will record it as I'm streaming so that way I can post a version of the live stream onto the page. But as I understand it, the live stream will save to the page. Good question, and I probably should have covered that up front. Thank you, and welcome. So, what did I do with this particular image? Well, I was messing around with it, and I tried my own presets. One of the issues that I had with my presets is the settings over here just kept getting changed, and I didn't like the way that was coming out. But I started messing with the minimalist presets, and I think this is kind of cool when you dial it back, right? I'm a subtle kind of person when it comes to editing. I think that this is a really good balance of grit versus color contrast pop, and then I would absolutely build from here, but this is perfect to just start with. Clicking on the tone enhancer, I would probably still bring down the blacks because I like my contrast in my images. That's just my style. And then maybe even open up some of the shadows just a tad bit. But this has a bleach bypass on it. I would actually go with a color adjustment, and I would click on the little eyedropper here, and I don't want hue. I want saturation because that's where I like to start, is with saturation. And I want these green leaves to really pop. I know that this is probably going to be in the yellows. Yeah, figured as much. And I want these to be a little bit more green. And, you know, I don't know, maybe let's go orange. I'll go green. And then we'll increase the range a tad, so that way we're selecting more of that yellow sampled color. We can look at it before and after. This is obviously before, after. It's subtle, but you know, when I see the image, I think that it just helps pull everything together. And then, of course, the last thing that I would do with this particular image is hit lighten, and I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger here. I'm going to bring my flow down to about 30 and leave the opacity at 100. Maybe that's too large. And all I'm going to do is lighten up the bird as a whole. Just like that. And then maybe even throw a little bit of structure so he becomes the sharper item in the frame. And if you have been watching any of my videos, you know that the very last thing that I like to do to an image, at least most of the time, is throw a vignette. And we're going to throw it around the edges. Well, I meant to put that on center, not edges. Edges just makes sense, right? But we want, because I want to darken the edges. So I'm going to bring this in closer to the bird, just like so. And now I'm going to pull this out about there and maybe bring the exposure down just a tad bit. And now we really are drawn into the bird. Hey Tracy, welcome. Do you use On1 PhotoRaw to manage your files? Yeah, I actually do. Actually I did just finish this edit, so let me go ahead and hit done on this. So what you are about to see, because I'm transparent, I'm a normal person, right? The hard drive that I use for the YouTube channel is very disjointed, because I keep all my client work on a completely different drive, but for the YouTube channel, I like to use a lot of images that are personal, and that's just so I protect my clients and things like that. With that being said, this is a drive that I call Creative Drive. Obviously, it's plugged in. It's one of my local drives. And inside of here, I have a raw image folder. And then I do, all of my cataloging, so to speak, inside of these folders, these subcategories and things of that sort. Now, let me just click on this one here. So this will take a minute to load. Once it decides to load the cover images. But, you can kind of get the idea. I use outside of a group of images because I shoot a lot of still life personally. That's what I shoot personally. Professionally is a lot of headshot, portrait photography, social media images, things of that sort. Now, of course, all of this for whatever reason, my computer is giving me a hard time. But yes, I put all of my still life images into subfolders inside of the one that says still life photo. And we'll go to this aloe plant just for the sake of clicking on it. And this, I apparently have not done any keywording to. But typically I have my keywords here, and I'll put a description if there's something that I need to describe, things of that sort. So yes, I absolutely use On1 PhotoRaw for my file management. This is my file management / photo editing application of choice. With that being said, I also use Finder to import my images. And then I do a rename inside of here sometimes, or I'll just use Finder and run a script to rename my files. That just depends on how I feel that day. I really don't have a rhyme or reason to it. As you can see, I renamed these to aloe vera, and it looks like I renamed them inside of On One because of the dash. I could have done that outside of On One. I can't really remember, but yes, I do use this as my to manage all of my files, even when it comes to exporting or preparing to deliver for clients, things of that sort. Okay, yeah. So On One, it really does. Just answering the question from John, On One really does work for that. Let me switch over to here. There we go. On One does work for file management as well as photo editing, and I've been using On One for a little over a year and some change now. I used to use Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, and I just wanted to find one application that I can use so I don't have to really learn multiple applications, which I'm finding the limitations now with On One. But if you are just editing general raw photos, I think On One's probably the best way to accomplish the edits as well as managing and organizing your files, specifically because the folders you're accessing directly to the hard drive. Now, based on the way that you have your computer and your RAM and your preferences set up, you can make a catalog, and this will cache the image so it processes a little bit faster. My computer, every time that I set up a cache, On One decides to stop working. A catalog. On One decides to stop working or work very, very slow. So I now just work off of the hard drive, and I clear my cache every time that I close out On One. So that's the way that I'm working right now. Hopefully the new iMacs will be announced by Apple, and I can get a pre-order in for a new computer, and things will go better. I hope. But good question, and yes, you can do it. Good. I don't know if it's afternoon or morning for you, Andrea, but welcome. And I'm excited that you're learning because again, my goal here is really just to help and be a average person trying to help people who I don't want to be like an expert. I actually hate the word expert because I don't know everything. I do know a lot of stuff, but I don't want it to be I know it and I'll never share it. So it always excites me to help people learn. The liver build. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I was, I probably should have researched it just so I could present that a little bit better. But thank you for helping me out with that. It's afternoon. Okay. Typical. Okay, so I was right. It is rain on the car. So now we know it's rain on the car. All right. So getting back to the photo editing, this image right here, also sent in by Andy Miller. I'm gonna open this one up. So if your On One ever does this, don't worry. Just give it a second. Sometimes what's happening is the computer is trying to render the file from the cache, but if you are running multiple things like I am, a screen recorder, a live streamer, things like that, so yes, the second screen does work for me. I don't use the second screen most of the time because it just doesn't really work for me. it does like this really weird, like your panel is on the right side, but your live view of the image, and I don't know why that's taken so long now. My software. I'm sorry, my computer is just crazy. It does what it wants, and right now, apparently, it does not want to open that photo. Let's see if we can get it to open this time. Usually, whenever it brings up that it can't load, it just fixes itself. But yes, I do use the second screen. As far as SmugMug, I don't use SmugMug. Now, that's because on my website, I have a delivery service for my clients. So I've never really had to use SmugMug. And I also have a print lab through MPix on my website. I use a program called Zenfolio, and they partner with a professional print lab called MPix. So if any of my clients decide to print their photos, and I really let my clients choose what they would like to print by going into their gallery, and I set up the pricing for them based off of the package and the service that they purchased from me at the time that we were doing business. So yes, I don't use SmugMug, unfortunately. But if that's something you're interested in, I can do some research on it to see how it works with ON1. But I personally don't use it. I'm glad I'm in good company when it comes to frustrating computers. I am so excited to be getting a new computer. Whenever they announced the iMacs with the new chip, I was so frustrated with my computer. At one point, I was going to go to a PC. Now, not that this really has much to do, but with photo editing at least, I'll let you in on, just back or behind the scenes of Free Will Photos. I use a ton of Apple software. I have a degree in music production, so I use Apple Logic or Logic Pro 10. I use Final Cut, and I use an iPhone. I mean, everything for me has been Apple for a very long time, and my computer was just giving me all kinds of issues. The Genius Bar was having a hard time trying to figure out what was going on with it. Eventually, I upgraded the RAM in it, and thankfully that's been helping, but I have still ran into some issues when it comes to just doing normal functions with a computer. This is a 2015 model, so a little dated, but I would hope that 6 years and the amount of money I invested in this machine should be good enough. But that's enough of a rant on the frustration that I have with my computer. With that being said, we'll talk about this photo. Yes, so I am going to be doing some wow, I really can't talk. I plan to do some advanced blending options inside of ON1. In fact, I'm going to kind of preview some of the blending options. I will definitely do a video breaking down the blend options. When it comes to that, though, and this photo is actually the primary example of how I'm going to show you introduce the blending options, because the final composite of this image, I used a few different blend options, or at least one for sure, and it just depends on what you're trying to go for in the final image that really determines which blend option you select. So this image here, this is the unedited version. I just wanted to show this really quick. So the sky is very, very blown out, which I didn't really deal with as much because the foreground is what I appreciated. And you can see the original image, it was a little crooked for the horizon. Now, I'm not a huge landscape photographer. I find going out and doing landscape is kind of fun, but I have learned that landscape photographers always like to have their horizons straight. Um, so I said, okay, well, at least I know what to do. Step number one is to straighten out the horizon. So let's just go ahead and jump into this because this is the final image that I was able to put together. And even I said earlier, I'm starting to find the limitations to ON1 and its loading. This is a pretty large file, so we'll give it some time to finish its loading. All right, and some of the limitations that I'm finding is really in the masking department. ON1 comes with a very, very good tool suite of masking capabilities. Let me close this out. There we go. Get a little bit more screen real estate here. ON1 really does come with some really cool masking capabilities, but as you can see, it's a little jagged across here, and I spent a lot of time trying to use the refine tool, and maybe I'm just not as good at this, at least in ON1, but I remember doing stuff like this in Photoshop and refining an edge using the refine tools inside of Photoshop just worked to me a little bit more fluent than using the refine feature over here. Not a deal breaker, okay? Not a deal breaker. Because many of us, if I were to present this image, obviously I'm not going to blow it up because if you make it huge, it's easy to pick out the imperfections. And I could probably even cover this with another layer of something and, you know, really blend that in, or maybe put some birds over that and make it look less obvious that this was not the original sky. But that is one of the limitations that I ran into. Now, yeah, my wife actually said the same thing, that this looks like it was at a beach on Mars. And genuinely, I just wanted to mess around with this. I got the idea from Luminar AI. They have this reflections feature inside of their particular, their new software. And let me make this full screen. I don't want to prolong getting into the actual edit. And then I will take my face off of here so that way we can focus in on just the image itself. So the very first thing, or this is the final image, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So this is the base image. And as you can see, the sky was removed, and I used the AI tool to get rid of the top portion of the sky and to leave just the bottom portion. So, you know, I have the 2/3 here roughly of what I wanted. And truthfully, this looks good, and, you know, I'm not complaining. And I made a few edits here inside of the, I guess it's inside of the effects. So let me go over those really quickly. The first one, dynamic contrast, that's just for all of this down here. I wanted to make this pop a little bit more. All right. I tried a sun flare, that didn't work out. That's why that's not showing. And then I decided, you know what? I need some sunshine in here. And let me turn these off so that way you can see the buildup. I decided I needed some sunshine in this particular image. Uh-oh. I'm on the wrong layer. So this is the other issue that I have with ON1. I turn on a layer thinking that I actually clicked on that layer, and then I go through the edits, and I knew something felt off because I didn't remember doing that, but I was like, well, clearly I did. I did not do that on that layer, so I apologize for the confusion on that. So learn from my mistake. When you click the bubble, make sure you got the rectangle going around the layer that you expect to actually make edits to. All right. With that being said, now that I'm on the right layer, clicking the Develop tab, you can see I made some very basic exposure, very, very basic exposure, nothing worth talking about here. You'll have to do this based off of your particular image, so I'll leave that alone. And then I went ahead and threw in the sky. Now, if I remember correctly, I didn't do anything to this one. Yeah, I didn't do anything to the sky. This is actually a sky that I imported from the extras tab out of, this comes stock with All-in-One Photo Raw. So everyone who has All-in-One Photo Raw, at least 2021, it may even be in some of the later or earlier versions, you have access to the sky by clicking on the add layers here. Or I'm sorry, not, wow, I'm clicking buttons I don't need to click. Let me get rid of that layer. The plus icon is the one that you'll click. And then if you click on extras, you can go to On1 extras, backgrounds, and then there's a folder with skies. And I could have used any one of these skies. For whatever reason, I chose this one. I don't know why I chose it. I just thought that's the one I wanted. No rhyme or reason. But needless to say, when you're doing composites and you have a sky that looks like this and a foreground that looks like this, you got to do something to fix that. And there's a lot of different ways of fixing it. Typically what I would do is I would make a gradient map inside of Photoshop, and that's just a really advanced way of coloring tones. So you're making sure that the exposure matches the exposure of the other image. Unfortunately, All-in-One Photo Raw, at least to the best of my knowledge, and I've looked, you can't create gradient maps. So this is where the advanced blending options start to come in. And I wouldn't even say advanced, because most of the time, if you're going over the top in advancements, yes, you can make a really cool thing, but you should really only be using the tools that you need to build the final outcome. And so this is not a very complex blending option, but I will explain kind of where it came from. So what we have here, let me go into the actual blending option, and I'm going to put it back to normal. So, and I got to bring the opacity up. All right, there it is. This is, and let me turn off the blur. So that way you can see literally every single step that I did here. So what I did was I copied the sky, and then I inverted it or flipped it upside down using the transform tool. So actually click off of that, click transform. It flips the sky upside down. I could flip it this way. It'll go right side back up, or I'm sorry. Yeah, right side back up. And then this is the bottom. As you can see, it's covering that. So, sorry, I'm all over the place. When you build a composite, it does take a little bit of time to figure out, you know, what it is that you want to do. And yeah, so flip. This is a duplicate of the sky that I used to replace in the image. I'm going to flip that. So now what used to be the bottom, this portion of the image, is now at this portion of the image. And I'm just going to layer those right over each other. Okay? Being very, very careful not to go into the sky that I actually want to reveal. And then you just hit apply. All right. That leaves it in that place. You can hit zoom. We'll go back to fit. And there's going to be this really weird line that comes around the side here. Come on, computer. You could do it. Obviously, this is not what we want to see. So the very first thing that I like to do before I even mess with my blend modes is to see if the opacity will get me the result that I want. Which, when I brought this down to roughly 50%, it did get me what I wanted. But there's a problem. The clouds that are in the sky are very obviously all over the sand here. And then the yellow that was going to be up here is over the water. And that just doesn't look the way that I want it to look. So I went with a blur. I went ahead and put a Gaussian blur on. And now all of those things are gone. But this looks like a color hazy overlay looking thing. And it just doesn't look good. Could you get away with it? Maybe. I wasn't a fan of it. So what I did was decide to, experiment. And when I say experiment, I really do mean experiment. But essentially, all of these blend modes are broken up into categories. All right. And I'm going to go over them really briefly, but I will do a better video that explains the categories in the future. The first one is just normal. That's just how the pixels are going to interact, and no issues whatsoever, right? It's not going to interact at all. It's just going to set the pixels on top of other pixels, and that's that. Now, the first group of blending options, this is literally a darken category. How do you want the pixels that are in the layer to darken your image? All right, that's the first set of category. The second set is lighten. How do you want the pixels to brighten your image or whatever they're sitting on top of? All right. The first two are really easy to remember because the very first one in this category is darken, and the very first one in the second category is lighten. Now, the third category is more of a combination of lighten and darken based off of what type of light is in the underlying layer. This is where, again, it gets a little bit more convoluted, but essentially the easiest way of thinking of these is, what is the light underneath? Do I have a light image underneath or a dark image underneath the layer that I'm trying to blend? If you have a dark image underneath, you're probably going to go with one of these linear lights because that's going to, you're probably going to go with one of the soft lights because that's going to brighten and interact with it that way. And you also have to choose how do you want to interact with it. Or if you have a light image underneath, you're going to want to go with probably hard light because it's going to bring out the darker tones and blend better with the lighter tones. That is a terrible explanation. Disregard all of that. I will gather my thoughts on how I really want to explain that because this section here is a little bit more convoluted. It's not as straightforward, but the next section down is difference. Essentially, 180 of whatever is on the top layer will invert to the other layer. And then exclusion is I'm going to take away everything that is equal to a tone, essentially. And then we have hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. these ones are probably very easy. This one affects the hue. The hue is how orange is an orange or how red is a red. And then you have saturation, which is how much of that red is vibrant, essentially. Yeah, what is the quantity of orange in that situation, I guess is the better way of saying it. Then you have color. This is going to blend with the color of your image. Now, when I originally started to do this this composition or this composite, I had this on color, but as you can see, it just didn't look good. So I was actually messing around with this and realized that color was not the blend mode that I wanted. And then, of course, luminosity. This blends the top layer with whatever luminance values are in the underlying layer. I use luminosity very sparingly, but I don't want to affect the tones. I want to affect the color of what's underneath here. So I put it on overlay. And what this essentially becomes is a color overlay of the sky, which if you think about it, this is what we're going to end up with in the end anyway, which is a bright sky, and then it's going to cast its color onto the ground. So in a nutshell, that is the blending modes. The best way that I can explain for anyone, or the best thing that I can recommend for anyone who wants to learn how to use these blend modes, is to just experiment with them. You're not going to destroy your image. And, you know, sometimes the experimentation is what really gets you to the finish line of saying, yeah, I know what I need to use. Or it at least gets you in the ballpark of saying, you know what, last time I tried that, it did this. Maybe that's what I need to do to this image. Because, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who have memorized how every last one of these blending options works. But on one, unlike, what just happened? On one, unlike Photoshop and some of the other photo editing applications out there, you can literally choose a blending option for every single effect and local adjustment. In order to do that inside of Photoshop, you would have to do like the blend if and create new layers every single time you wanted to make an effect for a particular paint. And very few people do that inside of Photoshop, right? Maybe like some really advanced photo editors or graphic designers do that. So, wrapping up this particular edit, obviously, this still doesn't look quite like, it doesn't feel like this sky was in the same scene as this foreground. They look like they could have been because the colors are matching a little bit better. But what you have to do is put a LUT essentially over this. So what I did was I right-clicked and I clicked on New Stamped Layer. And that gave me all of these layers, these three, because this one didn't exist. It gives me these three into one layer. So if I were to turn this off, and this off, and just turn this one on, and then I better select it, I get the stamped layer, and this is where I started adding in my final effects to get the result that I was looking for. So I'll go ahead and turn these off real quick. So the very first thing is I thought the image was looking a little dull in the foreground. So I added in dynamic contrast. That's going to get this to pop a little bit more. And It makes this a little bit darker, which matches the sky, because the foreground, depending on where the sun is and how it's shining, which in this picture, it's shining this direction, right? This particular sunset doesn't quite match the sun's direction, but I said, you know what, I'm gonna roll with it, and that was just a creative choice that I chose. However, I wanted this to be I wanted this to stand out, so I added in some dynamic contrast, and then I used a mask to just masking out the top portion or the bottom portion, however you want to look at it. And then I used my flow and opacity to dim down the water a little bit, because I didn't want contrast over there in the water as much, because you don't really need contrast in water. So that's where that other painting was coming from. I tried to do a sun flare, and I'll show this because not everything works out when you try to do it, right? And sometimes I feel like when we go to share our photos, we only show. Now, why isn't there it is. So the sun flare, it just didn't work. I didn't like it there. I tried to transform it and drag it around over here to the side, but I don't know. I was trying to point at my monitor with my finger. You can't see that. But if you look down here at the big rock in the foreground, you can see that there's some lens flares. The lens flares I wasn't a fan of, and I knew I could mask them out. So I was like, all right, that's fine. I'll mask them out. And then I'll pull this down. But as I started pulling this down, I realized this flare is actually just a straight line. And that I can't rotate this, freely the way that I would like to. So I just left it alone. Moral of the story, I turned it off, and you get to see that it was turned off. It wasn't working for me. If that has ever happened to you, another planet with multiple suns, yeah, it absolutely is. And I acknowledge you, Tracy, that you have Zenfolio. That's by far, I love Zenfolio. There's some things to be desired after, but it works. It gets the job done. My clients are happy, and so it is a. Do you export all the files you're going to upload to another? Okay. Sorry I didn't answer your question earlier, Tracy. So, yes. Because I archive every last one of my clients' photos, they have a folder, and inside of that folder, I have my deliverables. Now, based on the contract that I signed with my client, there's two different folders for the deliverable. There's the proofing gallery, and then there's the retouch gallery. If they did not ask for any photos to be retouched, then whatever we agreed upon in the contract for the deliverable photo quantity, that goes into the folder inside of their that particular work order, so to speak, inside of the proofing gallery folder. And I upload that as the proofing gallery, and I always offer my clients an opportunity to reshoot, because I don't want them to feel like they're getting photos that they're not approved of. But I shoot tethered most of the time whenever I'm working with a client, so they see the photos, essentially proofing them right there. But I do come back and do a little bit of color correction. So that's the reason why I put them into ON1, which, because I was shooting tethered, they're already there. From that point, I upload the proofing gallery to Zenfolio, and I send them their gallery link if they didn't already have it. They go in and they proof their images using the client feature, or they create an account and they can put a heart, they can leave comments and things like that. So if they want to retouch, I give them a deadline. I'd say, hey, you get 2 weeks to look at your images, and by the time 2 weeks are up, I'll go in there. If you haven't selected them, then I'll send you an email saying, hey, I need you, because everything needs to be in writing, just in case somebody tries to come back and say that I wasn't communicating. I do all of my communication straight from Zenfolio with my clients as well. And that's backed up in my actual email for Free Will Photos, my business side of Free Will Photos, not my Gmail account. And all of that interaction, I use Zenfolio for that. The on one side really just helps me with editing, batch processing, and then exporting to a folder so I can deliver. For retouching, right now I've been using On1 for anyone who has asked for retouching, and I don't feel like I'm delivering bad work to the client, and the clients are happy, or at least no one has come back and said, hey, I don't like the way you retouch my skin. And I have been using Portrait AI as well as the local tab to make those retouches inside of On1 Photo Raw. Now, most of my professional work, if you will, or the work that I get paid for, they are portrait headshots. I do some family portraits, and I also do some portraits of couples and just general portraits. But most of the time, it's headshots. So sorry I didn't answer that question earlier. Now back to the edit. The sunshine. I wanted to add a little bit more warmth to the image because I felt that the sky was really, really warm. So I went ahead and threw in a sunshine filter. If you have never used the sunshine filter, this works really, really well on landscape images. You can even get some creative looks in portraits if you're outdoors and you're shooting natural light. I would be careful using the sunshine filter on anything where you're using a flash of some sort as your key light. But if you're photographing outdoors using natural light, the sunshine feature really does work well because it colors the I don't know, it just works. I don't know how On1 built this. I'm not a genius. I just play around with the tools and see what works, and I love the sunshine filter for outdoors. The next thing that I threw on here, and truthfully, I should be really honest, I threw the LUT on here first, and I experimented with a lot of different LUTs, and no, I did not use the local tab to generate the LUT. I probably could have. I was not looking to spend a whole lot of time with developing this composite because partly I was going to do this 100% live, and then I realized no, there's a lot of different pieces to building a composite, and I don't know if that would be entertaining to you, to the audience. So, if that is, then please let me know, and I will set it up. And that'll probably just be an entire live stream where I go through building a full composite, and getting from point A to point Z. So if that's something you're interested in, just let me know. But I did mess around with a lot of color grading here. A lot of LUTs. I ended up using the color grading and Aiken, I think is how you say this one. I don't know. And then I threw up the contrast and the saturation again. Something didn't work out right there. There we go. It wasn't Aiken. It was Branniga. I don't know how. I guess my mouse just hovered over that one. But I decided to use this particular LUT, and then I brought it down to 50%, and 50% just didn't look right. So 46, it just worked out. Again, these are decisions that you have to make for the composite that you're building. Don't worry so much about the numbers, which is why I'm not going over each one of the individual sliders, because it really doesn't matter what I did, because the problem set that you'll be faced with in your composite is going to be very, very different than the problems that I ran into, or at least I believe they will be. I could be wrong. And then the last thing, and this one is a really tough one because let me pull up the crop tool real quick. So I obviously had to crop it to straighten out the image. And I put the horizon line on the top third of the image, which gives me 2/3 of the image in the foreground. The rock is a really, really big piece here, and I wanted to make sure that that was on one of the power points or the intersecting points. And I played around with this a little bit and found that this was the best composition. The reason why I bring that up is there's nothing anywhere else to draw the eye that makes this interesting. And that's kind of the challenge with this particular image. How do you capture an audience? Which is why I decided to go with the color and then the composition of putting this rock on the lower third, and then putting the horizon on the top third. But the only way that I can really draw a person into this image is if I throw a vignette on it, and it just makes you say, okay, I'm at this rock and I'm staring out into the ocean, potentially on another planet like Mars. And, you know, this is not a realistic looking image, but it's an aesthetically pleasing image, minus some of the imperfections on the masking of the sky. But overall, you know, when I sat here and I looked at it, I said, you know, no, this does not look real. It's not subtle at all. It's in your face. But it could have a place in the sense that this is digital art. Now, one of the things that I decided to do here as well, and I'll turn it off first, was a very, very subtle thing. I felt that the rock itself was not getting the attention that it deserved, because the sun is coming in from the left here. And it's very clear that the sun's coming in from the left because all of the shadows are back here, right? So the sun is on the opposite side of the shadows being cast. So this is a key indicator that the sun is coming from the left in the image. So I said, all right, well, yeah, the sun's coming from the left. I already went overboard. How can I make this rock look a little bit better? And I came to the conclusion that I should just open up the shadows, and that's what I did. So it doesn't look like a huge change, but I worked on this image for about 40 minutes. You know, when it was all said and done, it was about 40 minutes. I walked out, I came back in, and the very first thing that I seen was the rock, and I was like, well, that's not very interesting. And that's why I decided to brighten the shadows, even though it does not make sense with the sun, with the exception that there is a brighter area on the ground right here. So again, when you're composing or compositing an image, you're gonna make up a lot of stuff, and it's not right or wrong. It's just what you choose to do with the materials you have available to you. And that's what I did. I did what I could with the materials available to me. And I like the final image. It's something that, if this were an image that I took, I would absolutely add this to my personal collection of stuff to share with friends and family, and with you all, with YouTube. I would not be disappointed with this image, with the exception of I need to clean up that sky, the mask on the sky. Everything else in the image, I think, came out really, really well. And I would be interested to see how that prints. Now, this image here, we're getting close. We're about 10 minutes from the scheduled stop time. So if you have questions, please drop them into the chat box, and I want to get to anyone's questions, because this image was very easy to edit. As soon as I seen it, I said, okay, chaos. How do you provide clarity in a chaotic environment? I know a lot of people who are afraid of birds, and if they were to see this image, it could potentially cause some nightmares for them. That's beside the point. I just thought that was funny when I seen it, and I said, okay, how do you make out what this looks like? So just for everyone's reference, this is the original image, and it was shot with a what is this? Well, it looks like it had a 1.4 teleconverter on it. So it was shot with a 600 millimeter f4 G Master. So it looks like, a Sony G Master. And with the teleconverter, it turned into a 840 millimeter lens, which means you lost a significant amount of light, which is why this is shot at f7.1, and then it has a 1 1/3 stop of exposure compensation removed. So I don't know if it was a really bright day or not. I'm going to assume that it was fairly bright since it was at 400 ISO, shooting at 1/600,000th of a second. Moral of the story, it was dark, and I said, okay, it's very claustrophobic. We understand the subject and the story that we want to convey is something caused all these birds to fly. Well, it needs to be brightened, and we need to see the color in the birds and contrast them to the background. So very simply, I did some exposure here. Obviously boost the exposure a little bit, brought down the highlights, brought up the whites because the birds, they appeared to have been white. I did not do anything with the color balance here, because I don't know. Let's see if the color balance would have made a difference. We'll use this bird right here. And yeah, I don't see much of a difference between as shot. Yeah, I'm not seeing a huge difference. So it's probably as accurate as it needed to be. Whenever you're shooting outside, you're always going to have a little bit of a color shift or tint. So I get it. With that being said, I went into the effects and I threw one very, very simple thing on here, and that's the HDR. the HDR, I lowered the compression, brought up the detail, a little bit of clarity, and the highlights, and then I made it a little bit more vibrant. So this is what the image would have looked like once it once my computer catches up. Hopefully it catches up soon. Yeah, so it's a very subtle change there, right? This is like the lights are dimmed, and then you click the HDR and the lights turn up, things just start to pop. The contrast is there, the clarity is there, and you get the picture of what this group of birds looks like. So that's all I did there. And then I came over to the local tab and I said, excuse me. Sorry about that. I had to cough. So you don't get the same effect if you don't lower the brightness on these birds down here. I don't think that these birds are very important because most of them are just looking around. These birds are actually doing something. The action is all up in here. So what I did is I put a gradient starting from the bottom, moving up, and it draws your eye. As soon as you see the picture, you're like, okay, you know what? I want to see what's happening here. And then you can look down here, as you start to wander around the image, you can look down at the bottom and say, oh yeah, what's this? And when you get down to the bottom, you're like, oh yeah, those birds, they're just sitting around. And then you come up here and you find the birds that are flying. It's just way, way more impactful, I think. That's the edit that I came up with for this particular image. So, looks like we're getting close to the end. I'm not going to be able to get to this photo today, but this photo, let me go ahead and just blow it up real quick. This photo is shot really, really well. It's already composed. I mean, the way that the antlers, the position of I don't even know, this is not a deer. And if it is, it's a very big deer, like a very buff deer. Don't know what this is. I don't know my animals. And I also don't know my geographical location, so I don't know a lot. What I do know is this is a really good photo, or at least I believe it to be one. And the background is just very, very well maintained. It's beautiful, all right? This is one of those images that once it's edited, you really don't need to do much more to it, except for whatever the purpose is for it. So this looks like a postcard to me. If I were to do anything with this, I would just turn on the text tool and I would write some text in there, and maybe on this side put a cut out the animal and put a gradient that with a very opaque color that complements the greens and the yellows, and drag that probably to about 1/3 of the image on this side, and maybe throw some text over here as well for a postcard, just saying what this animal is, because for people like me who don't know what this animal is, let me know in the chat box if you know what this animal is. Or, you can do all kinds of stuff. This would be something that I would take into Photoshop. I would not really do here inside of On1 Photo Raw because it's just easier to do. Like you go into Photoshop and you click select subject, it's probably going to select the subject really well. Select subject is a far more superior tool than the AI selection tools that are in On1, and rightfully so, right? But this isn't about Photoshop. This is about ON1. So what I would do in ON1 is cut this animal out to the best of my ability, drag over to the 1/3 and opaque thing, type in an opaque color, type in some text here that talks about the animal or where this was, and then maybe some text over here. This just looks like a really good postcard type deal. And I'm not trying to be offensive. If someone's like, "Oh man, you just called my work postcard material," I think that some of the most beautiful pictures and most well composed and edited photos are on postcards. If you ever travel and you stop into a place, pick up a few postcards of pictures around the local area and tell me if you get inspired or not. Like, you see it and it's like, oh yeah, that's gorgeous. I'm going to go and try and do that. Which, for me, if it's landscape, it usually doesn't work out the way that I see it on the postcard, because apparently I'm not, that's not my cup of tea. I'm not good at that. So, go ahead and bring it back here. So, there you have it. That is definitely the stream for this go round. I really do look forward to generating another live stream, and hopefully my camera works the way that it's supposed to, or we work with the tools that we're given, and this is the tool that I have right now. So when my computer starts to cooperate, I'm thankful that it actually cooperated during the live stream, because one of the issues I was having with it is it would give me a kernel panic every time that I ran the live stream. So to be able to make it 2 hours on a live stream. Yeah, if postcards can make money. I mean, you could make a postcard right now and definitely make some money off of that. I know that there are a lot of people in stock photography. They make a lot of money off of seemingly postcard material. So maybe that's a venture. It never really worked out for me, and I'm not saying that it'll never work out for anyone else. So, yeah. Let me just come over here to the comment section. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pull it onto my second monitor so I can actually look at the comments and then talk in here. Because if you have questions, I want to answer them. I really, want to be, I want to be as helpful as I can, but also a good steward of your time, because you guys did spend some time with me today, and I really appreciate that. And John says, "Thank you. Very enjoyable. You've given me many thoughts to work on." Awesome. Hey, you're welcome, John. I really appreciate you hanging out, and I like to experiment. I grew up using Photoshop and Lightroom, got tired of the subscription, and now I'm just trying to push ON1 to do the things that I would normally do inside of Photoshop. Sorry that my camera keeps going in and out. The sun is apparently going between clouds, and my camera's just trying to figure out where I'm at. But yeah, now I really do appreciate everyone hanging out. And one of the things that I do want to show, if I can, let me see if I can get there. Because I'm not a huge social media person, right? The most social media that I use is is YouTube. However, I am a fan of YouTube, and on YouTube there is a section. So let me see if this even will pop up. Hopefully it does. Go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. All right. and switch over to here. All right. So looks like it popped up on the actual channel. Up here at the top, there's some tabs, and if you click on discussion, this is where I'm going to be posting a lot of information as I'm working on stuff because I feel like everyone is already on YouTube. Why go to another platform? And this is probably one of the best places. So I'm not 100% sure if you can leave questions or comments or anything. I know that you can reply to comments. If you can leave comments on the discussion board, I promise you this is probably a good place. If you just have general questions and you don't really, it doesn't fit or apply to a particular video. If you have requests on things that you want to see me make videos for, drop them into the discussion section right here. I think this is going to be the best place for us to be able to communicate as a community, and I can respond directly back to anyone and offer that up. And then, of course, the last thing, I've mentioned this to a few of the individuals that have turned in photos for the editing. I am offering free one-on-one opportunities. So if you have questions about how to edit photos or how to use All-in Photo Raw, and you want to get into a Zoom meeting or a Google Hangouts, again, I just want to give back to the community. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd be more than happy to set that up with you. Just shoot me an email at freewillphotos@gmail.com, and I will reach out to you. We'll coordinate that and go step by step. That way you can share your screen, and I'll kind of look over your shoulder and say, okay, what about thinking of adding this? I don't want to ever think that the way that I edit photos, which by the way is not the best way, it's just the way that I do it, because I have a style and I know what I like to get out of my images. So I will like to help anyone who is looking for that type of material. Okay, so I don't want to keep rambling. If there's no questions, well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. Yeah, all you got to do is shoot me an email and we'll work it out from there. 100% free of charge. And they're going to be about 30 minutes. That's probably about the maximum that I can cut out of my schedule right now. But I just want to give back to the community. So if that's something you're interested in, please. Let's see. The new M1 Max sound good. I'm happy to send. Oh, yeah. I love the Olympus files. Those were extremely easy. They were exposed very well. And I don't like things for the sake of being easy. I like things for the sake of they were easy for me to creatively think of what I wanted to do. So I like challenges. I like to challenge myself inside of On1 to see if I can figure out how to do something. So yeah. And thank you for hanging out, Andrea. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to getting a new M1 Mac as soon as they release the iMac version. I don't want to get a Mac Mini and then regret purchasing that upon the release of the iMac and the longevity of the machine. So that's the only reason why I haven't made the decision to go buy the Mac Mini, and I definitely don't care to have a laptop. I don't need a laptop in most cases. I already have one, so yeah. Oh man. Well, again, I want to say thank you to everyone who came and hung out. Hopefully this live stream saves on the webpage on YouTube. Hopefully it saves on YouTube. If it doesn't, I promise I will record the next one and upload that instead of relying on YouTube to upload it, but I'm pretty sure YouTube is going to upload it. So with that, until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace out.